I guess I wondered, as you watch these political campaigns play out on the social space of really of Twitter primarily is where the core political campaign, the presidential campaign, is played. I wonder what you see the campaigns using it for, and how you see the campaigns sort of being transformed by this new social media.
Well, it's a megaphone like they've never had before, because they can reach a wider variety of people than they could with their past megaphones, which were doing television interviews, arranging interviews with the media, buying television ads, which are very sort of restrictive in their format. I noticed last week in the debates, and I was struck by what the Obama campaign was trying to do during the second presidential debate. Of course, they had to pump up the message that Obama was back. And so you had campaign staffers within the first few minutes of the debate going onto Twitter and picking Twitter messages that they loved from viewers who were saying Obama's back. But they were also trying to promote a different notion, which I didn't think bubbled up nearly as much during the debate, but they did try at least. It wasn't without lack of trying. And it was the idea of the real Romney. And they would pick this hashtag, which is a way to organize tweets on Twitter. They would pick the hashtag real Romney. And they would post lots of messages about how Romney was flip-flopping, reversing his position. The message was, we don't know who the real Romney is. And they tried really hard, maybe only moderately successfully, to push that message up. But gosh, they did try. Hundreds of messages with the hashtag Real Romney during the debate. And you could see them trying to change the narrative in real time in a way that we couldn't see that in the past. We couldn't see it online in the past.
Well, I always find it reassuring that the ersatz ones you rarely catch on.
The ones pushed by the campaigns.
Yeah, that it's hard to, you can't just make
the artificial ones, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And Dan, we were talking before, and I was interested in your take on, as we go through this presidential campaign and this landscape that's been accelerated so much into these 20-minute news cycles, and also somehow kind of flattened. Every tweet is the same weight, whether it's what, and kind of I guess you said you thought a little about how this would have played out in earlier political moments, and particularly in Watergate.
Well, during the Watergate time, which is getting to be a long time back, certainly the White House and the Nixon administration would have had a lot of people committed to Twitter, Facebook, social media, everything on the internet, to play defense by playing offense. I have no idea how it would have played out. Would the president have been forced to resign had we had it? My own opinion, clearly labeled, is probably, but that's somewhat tentative, because as Brian just pointed out, the megaphone is much bigger today, and the speed of everything has been so accelerated. Keep in mind, just go back in time, there were 3 networks at that time, only 3 networks at the time. No Twitter, no Facebook, no internet, no cell phones. And so people had to wait for either the morning newspaper or the evening newscast, or possibly during the day some radio. Everything was slower, much, much slower. It would be like seeing Watergate play out in slow motion compared to what it would be today. Now, the power of the presidency, when it sets its mind to it, whether it be Democrat, Republican, or Mugwump, whoever's in power at the time, they can command tremendous resources. So I don't quite know how it would have played out, but I think there's a possibility that they would have been able to play defense by playing offense much more effectively than they were during that time.
I wonder if it would have been obvious how big a deal it was. Because now we see every scandal try to be turned into Watergate by some political party. We're seeing that now with Libya. Whether it is or not a severe scandal, it is trying to be presented that way.
I wonder if we would have that are really scandalous
would still bubble up.
Still bubble up. I think that that's one thing that I was struck by on Twitter was when I cover a lot of woman-related issues, and so I'm used to seeing news stories or comments relating to women and reproductive rights sort of bubble up in my feminism stream as part of my Twitter feed, but rarely cross over into the mainstream feed. And when Todd Akin made his comments about legitimate rape, when I first saw that, I actually didn't think it would be a big story because it seemed to me to sort of fall into the category of things that would bubble up in my feminism stream.
Just like the outrage of the day.
Well, there's a lot of outrage, and there's a lot to be outraged by, but you know, it's hard to get the mainstream, which is, the mainstream media is dominated by men, so that's a particular worldview, to, you know, and you see this playing out, that to care as much or take as much of an interest in the minutiae of that particular story. And so to see that cross over into my main Twitter feed was the first clue that I had when all of a sudden all of these men were tweeting and retweeting about Todd Akin. I was like, whoa, dudes care about women's reproductive rights. This is sort of a big deal.
So what makes, I mean, the other story, I guess, very roughly in that space that has crossed over in a big way is Malala, this Pakistani girl who was shot. You know, and in this incredibly crowded news environment, what is it that pulls something out of this kind of flattened, here's another thing, into being? Is it some central decision maker? Is it, you know, executives at CBS News? Is it somebody with a lot of Twitter followers?
Part of the answer might lie in the digestibility of it. Legitimate rape is a two-word phrase or two-word concept that is very easily graspable, whether we understand what he was saying or not.
Well, we understand how things work in the body.
I think this is a strong point, though, that words still matter. And Mark Twain once said the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between fire and firefly. And answer your question of what catches on, legitimate rape, as Brian just pointed out, it's, you know, two words. It can be tweeted quite easily, and it can go viral. And it's telling language. It tells a story in itself, if you will, in just two words. I think in this, including myself, too often we are racing to get the tweet up because we want to be the first to do it before we think about wording is still important. What phrases you, what verbs, preferably an active verb that you use, that it still makes a difference. It wouldn't be good writing as described by Mrs. Eleanor Wright, who was my high school writing teacher. But in the modern context, it matters who's writing it, how good a writer they are, what phrases they turn, what verbs they use. And answer your question of what can catch on. By the way, it occurs to me, you mentioned earlier, I may have a longer resume than most people up on the stage, but I also have a slower mind these days. But one difference in the Watergate era is we didn't have what we have now on radio or on television, nearly as much of people who are on with, quote, news programs, I like to put it in quotation marks, that are not only openly but are proudly biased. One thing, we still were under the old FCC rules, the fairness doctrine, in which if you put on your radio station someone, pick a name, from the right side, you had to put on somebody with equal time, at or about equal time from the left side. And that's a big difference between today.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think, in terms of great writing, I do think, yeah, I mean, the tweets are the new headline. Right. And there is a lot of, I mean, I think wit is kind of winning again in a way.
Imagine what had happened if, when the New York City mayor proposed a soda restriction, which is what he did, we had used the word restriction rather than ban. No one banned soda in this city. He simply put very small restrictions on the amount of the sizes of the certain cups and certain sorts. And yet the media has always used the word ban, and now even the mayor's allies use the word ban. I've never understood it. Although I do know it's a one-syllable word, and the word restriction is a three-syllable word.
Well, another example would be...
It's not a ban. It's the most inaccurate word.
Think of all those characters you're wasting.
Well, another example would be Obamacare, that rather than the original title, Affordable Care Act, which is long, take up half your tweet practically just to say it, Obamacare, the Republicans quite, I think, give them credit. They recognize you need something short, punchy, descriptive, and now even the president himself describes it as Obamacare.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I should add that you can follow Dan Rather at Dan Rather Reports. He assures me he's writing his own tweets.